We're starting a new series today. So everybody, welcome to the new series. It is called Tending Chaos. Tending Chaos. And we'll be in this series for this month and next month. So today I'm mostly introducing sort of the principal concept of the series, and then we'll be addressing sort of individual types of chaos and how to tend them, and how to advance the kingdom in the midst of it in weeks to come. So today's kind of the foundational piece, and my guess is you're glad you're hearing it in person. But to those of you watching online, welcome. So I haven't done one of those in at least a year or two. I don't know if any of you got a chance to do some real Zoom broadcasting in days past, or some YouTube broadcasting. I like the in-person much better. I like to see your faces, not just because you're pretty people, but you are, but you respond. And I can tell if I've completely lost you or if you're engaged. And for me, that feedback is really valuable, so thank you. Anyway, all right. You ready?
Yeah.
So we're going to start at the very beginning.
It's a very good place to start.
Because it's a very good place to start. So Genesis chapter 1. If you're following along, Genesis chapter 1. I want to introduce to you where we're heading with tending chaos. I'm going to start at verse 26. So Genesis 1:26. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image and after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over the livestock and over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." Yes, even the creepy crawlies. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it." There's that word subdue. That's in today's title. "And have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." It's an interesting thing. I don't know how many of you, for any of you for whom English is not your first language, you know English is a really interesting language. We have borrowed words from so many other languages and given them a little tweak and called them our own. We have borrowed similar things. We'll use things as different where in their original languages they're the same. And one of those just happened, and you may have missed it. So I don't know if you know this or not, but God is sovereign. And sovereignty has to do with being the king. But we have dominion. And dominion has to do with being the king. It's an interesting reality. We often in the church will talk about the sovereignty of God, how he is in fact all-powerful and he is sovereign over all of creation. And we'll look at him in his very unique creator role, and everything else is creation. So I'm just a creature. Some of you are creatures of habit, and you sit in the same seats every Sunday. Some of you work in universities, and students walk in and they sit in the same seats in their classrooms, which is convenient for taking attendance, and really awkward when you slightly rearrange the room. And they walk in and they don't know what to do. Because we're creatures. And God's the creator. But we also were designed to have dominion. Which is to exercise authority like a king or a queen over a realm. And in this opening glimpse of mankind, God's like, you know what? I'm going to make humans. Mankind. Human beings. I'm going to make people. And I'm going to make them a lot like me. And the phrase here is in the image of God. And image is not, it's not a JPEG. Right? We don't look like God. We are like God. In part. So he's the creator and we are very creative. Right? He experiences emotions, so do we. He exercises will, so do we. You're created in God's image, and He's the king, and we are kings and queens. If it's helpful, for those of you Narnia fans, Peter was the high king, but there was another king, and there were two queens, and they all sat on equal thrones. Where's my Narnia fans? Okay? Right? So Jesus is the high king, and the rest of us are kings and queens. Because we've been given dominion over the birds, and the fish, and the livestock, and the creepy crawlies. And we've been given a task. If it helps you, on the royal hierarchy structure, we're middle management. Right? God's top management. And then He creates people who are profoundly like Him, though in creation version, right? So we're not all knowing and we're not all powerful, but we do have an amazing ability to develop knowledge. Not all knowledge, but a lot of knowledge. Which is why y'all are so smart. It's part of the image of God in you that you have the ability to gain knowledge, to gain wisdom, and to exercise that. It's a part of the reflection of God's intention that we would be, in fact, kings and queens of the earth. And that's from the beginning. Now, the interesting thing here is, I don't know if y'all know this, but Genesis chapter 1 comes before Genesis chapter 3. I don't know if any of you had ever observed that detail. But the reality is Genesis chapter 3 is where sin shows up, and we get a glimpse of how sin comes in and the curse that's on it. But Genesis chapter 1 is before that. And in the midst of Genesis chapter 1, there is still a need to subdue the earth. And there's a need for kings and queens to exercise authority as God's regents on the earth. By the way, there's another one of those words that came from another language. Regent. What's a regent? Synonym of regal, right? It's kingly. We're given authority. Regent? No? You're looking at me funny.
It's someone who rules in the place of somebody else.
Somebody who rules in some place of someone else is a regent. We are middle management. We've got work to do on this earth, and sometimes we're great at it, other times terrible. Sometimes we make good decisions, other times terrible. But we have work to do on the earth because the earth needs subdued. If you drive through the countryside here in central New York, beautiful fields, forests, hills, this is gorgeous countryside. Heather and I are still new enough here that every time we drive through the countryside, we're like, this is a really pretty place God dropped us. And we give Him a thanks, and we just keep looking at it and kind of smile. It's a really pretty place. I don't know if you know this or not, but every single one of those fields you drive by is man-made. Every single one of them. If we leave, all the humans in central New York are like, peace out, not coming back for 100 years. They would all be gone, and there would be a forest in every single one of them. Left to its own devices, every single one of these hills would be covered with trees. Every one of these valleys covered with trees. Every single pasture land you see, some human had to subdue that forest into a pasture. And they cut down the trees, and they got the stumps out. Oh, that's hard work. And they sowed grasses. And they built fences so that they could keep their livestock safe. And they could tend their dairy cows and collect the milk and feed people. But everything about that story requires them to subdue the earth. The earth left to its own devices is a jungle. And the earth left to its own devices is a jungle before sin enters the world. Work isn't tied to sin. Work's tied to our role as middle management. Adam Adam gets given work in Genesis chapter 2. And again, I don't know if you've noticed, Genesis chapter 2 comes before Genesis chapter 3. Something about the way numbers increase or something. Genesis chapter 2, there's this just really tender way that we see God as the creator making mankind and then immediately putting him on the earth and gives him a job. Go till the earth. Go cultivate the soil. Go take care of the plants. Right? He's put in the garden, but he has work to do. And there is a piece of our existence that will never lack the need for us to be a people at work. Now, hallelujah, there's also a Sabbath day, so there's a day for us to be a people at rest. But God's creation, it becomes a jungle if you leave it alone. And the jungle gets dangerous because of Genesis chapter 3. In Genesis chapter 3, starting at verse 17, God says to Adam, because you've listened to the voice of your wife and you've eaten of the tree which I commanded you, you shall not eat. He's wrote this command. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. And you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken. For you are dust. To dust you shall return. Anybody got some thorns and thistles in their yards? Anybody ever find some thorns and thistles barefoot? Where's my people that know what stinging nettles are? Oh. The earth was always a little exotic and always ready to turn into a jungle. There was a need to subdue the earth from the beginning, but poison ivy wasn't there before the fall. The thorns and the thistles and the stinging nettles, those are a product of the fall. And in short, they just make it harder. I don't know why the thorny plants have a taproot that goes halfway to the middle of the earth. I don't know why. But I know if I don't get all of it, it comes back. Because we have to tend the chaos. I remember at some point I was online, I was reading, and I was like, is there some way that I can just plant perennials and I can actually not have to do the yard work? Can I plant the flower beds once and ignore them?
No.
How many of y'all know the answer to that's yes and no?
Yeah.
Right? Will other weeds invade?
Yes.
Oh yeah. Or the grasses from your yard will go from where you want them into the flower bed where you don't want them. I watch how often people want a life that isn't work. The number of people who will play the lottery and their goal is to quit their job. And I don't know if that's because they hate their job, or because they're not in the right line of work, or because poverty is a chaos that is actually really difficult to navigate, and they're not good at tending it. But it's interesting to me how the lack of work is one of their hopes. And I go, actually, work's good for us. Now maybe your job's chaos. I don't know. But we're created for work. We have an earth to subdue. And it's really complicated to do it well because it's a little bit like chaos. I look at how we get this mixture of trying to bring order and creating chaos. I look at humans. Sometimes we try so hard and then we mess things up. Whale blubber produced such good lamp oil. And it provided the ability to have light after the sun went away. amazing. I mean, it brought so much order and so much advancement was done by the lamp with some whale oil in it. And then we noticed we were killing most of the whales. And then we realized that this resource is going to end. And so we wanted to stop killing the whales, but we still had a need to have order, and we found a different source of energy. I'm a fan of electricity, just for the record. Like, it does a lot of things in my life that are super helpful. Super helpful. We had to find a new source of energy. Because the one that we had in the attempt to tend our chaos was creating a different chaos. I think the oceans might have been harmed by the lack of all whales. Like, I think it would have been bad for us. I don't know. But I look, and we're in it again. You're like, hey, that sun is really clean energy. Let's go create a really environmental disaster of a mine to get the chemicals so we can harvest the sun. I'm like, that's kind of good and bad at the same time, folks. It's a mixed story. If none of the oil rigs leak oil, oil's so helpful. When they do, it's a disaster. And the chaos stirs around again. Because our world's complicated. And our world doesn't stop being complicated just because you fix it once. You clean it up, it finds a way to mess itself up again. You do some maintenance on your car, later your car needs more maintenance. You mow your lawn, later you need to mow your lawn. You remove some weeds, later you need to remove some weeds. And if you at any point stop tending the chaos, it swirls. It swirls. And I laughed at this. So I don't know how many of you have sat with small children watching animated films over the years. I have done this a few times. But I'm watching The Incredibles, and in the opening scene, Mr. Incredible is getting interviewed. And he kind of expresses this, I wish at some point that this world would stay cleaned up. He goes and he arrests all the bad guys and he saves the day, and then they just do it all over again. And there's this frustration. Why can't the world just stay saved? Have you all felt that exhaustion? I don't know if you know this, but you could do the dishes today and have dirty dishes tomorrow. In my house, you could do all the dishes, go to bed, and wake up to dirty dishes. Or you could do the dishes and think you're done, and then somebody goes and gets the ones that are in their room. And to be fair, I'm not throwing the kids under the bus there. That could be me. That could be me. Our world is one that constantly wants to stir into chaos. And we are the kings and queens that need to bring order to the world. It's why we must advance the kingdom. Because if we don't advance the kingdom, it will swirl out of control. It wants to swirl. It will swirl out of control. And it's worse since the fall. Romans 8, 18-23 describes it this way. For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. Not only creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit. We groan inwardly as we eagerly wait for adoption as sons, the redemptions of our body. Creation wants the order that good dominion brings. Creation wants to see the glory of God fill the whole earth. And we get that job. Let's create mankind and let's give them dominion. Let's create mankind and let's put them in charge at the middle management level of in charge. We're not gods. We're in His image. We've got work to do. And that work is going to be part of your life. You're going to rest on the Sabbath, and you're going to get up and work 6 days. And you're going to rest on the Sabbath, and you're going to get up and work 6 days. And you're going to rest on the Sabbath, and you're going to get up and work 6 days. And we need to embrace that as part of our calling. You get to build the kingdom. You get to advance the kingdom. You get to advance order in the midst of chaos. You get to advance justice where there's injustice. You get to advance righteousness where there's unrighteousness. You get to bring the kingdom to the chaos. Psalm 72, verse 19 says, "May the whole earth be filled with His glory." Yeah, that's it. That's the goal. The whole earth. May the whole earth be filled with His glory. But it means we can't take years off. As I look through some of our history, the particular variety of chaos and the fight that we have has shifted, through the centuries. And there's times when we've not brought the fight that we rightly should have. I look at subtle little things. I don't know if you remember the modern era. Good times. Focus of the modern era was very much on logic and facts. And the world tried to reject the supernatural in the process. And some, even among the Christians, played along. They're like, hey, maybe all the magic stuff Jesus did, the hocus pocus, the miracles, maybe that's just mythology. Maybe, in fact, Jesus was just a good teacher. So let's highlight the words that He spoke as teaching and kind of give them prominence and kind of ignore the mythology. And they gave us the red letter Bible. As if the Creator couldn't do supernatural things. As if we, as God's children, couldn't enter into supernatural things. And I watched as you look through the history, you can see how much of Christianity became sort of an intellectual game. And the focus of so many of the fundamentals was on believing the right doctrine. But those facts became kind of obscured as we got into postmodernism. And postmodernism kind of allows that you can have your facts and I can have my facts and they can be completely at odds, and that's not a logical fallacy. No, there's truth in the world. We don't need to give up the order of truth for the chaos of postmodernism. We don't actually have to do that. Because if we do, people are going to flounder. And they're going to get stuck in the confusion of not knowing what's true. And in the midst of all that, we have a kingdom to bring. We have a kingdom to build. And if we in any way abdicate our role, we in any way step aside, if we stop tending the chaos, if we stop weeding our flower beds, if we stop getting the weeds out of our garden, then we won't bear fruit for the kingdom. So years ago, Heather and I moved into rented a new house. This was in Georgia, and the family that owned it before us had been there a long time, and for the last 30 years of this man's life, he had worked, got his pension, retired, gardened. And for 30 years, his primary occupation year-round was gardening. And his garden was 80 feet by 90 feet. It's pretty close to the shape of this room. Y'all with me? And he had, in 30 years, taken Georgia red clay and turned it into brown dirt that looked like it could grow things. He had taken all of his 2 acres of fallen leaves and tilled it into his garden every year for 30 years. It was dark brown, and you could crumble it, which is not normal for Georgia clay. It was the most amazing dirt I've ever seen. But the last 3 years of his life, he had been ill and had neglected it. And the average height of the garden when we moved in was taller than me. In weeds. And in trees with trunks the size of my arm already. And I looked at this garden, and it's as big as this room. I don't know what to do with that. I was overwhelmed, absolutely overwhelmed. But we have like the best dirt in Georgia. Like, we should try to grow something. And so I went over to the corner, and I picked a spot about this big, which in hindsight was incredibly ambitious because I did not know what I was getting myself into. But I went out there and I hacked down the weeds and hauled them over to a compost pile. And then I borrowed a tiller and I fought the roots of those weeds. Foot by foot by foot. And it was exhausting work because it had been neglected. And I hacked out a little spot, and we planted some little seedlings and some seeds, and they were sprouting up, and I felt like such a gardener. And we had to go on vacation. And I was, Georgia gets pretty hot in the summer, so I was like, hey, friend of mine who lives nearby, if it doesn't rain, if it's hot, could you give the garden a little water? Now, I thought I had clarified that it didn't need watered that often, just if there's big gaps. Anyway, he heard, come water this twice a day, every day you're gone. Which I'm really sure is not what I said. Like, I'm really sure. But somehow that's how he applied it. And we came back, and the garden was this tall. And it was all sorts of weeds. And I had trouble finding my plants. And we did not harvest much that year. Because the chaos kept us from bearing fruit. We have work to do, church. I don't know how many of you walked in today and your life is just experiencing some good chaos this week. Just some glorious chaos just jumped into your lap. Or maybe you had a week off. Or maybe you have a friend whose life is in chaos. It's not for me, I'm just asking for a friend. The reality is that our world is this combination of just difficulty and new moments, and we get to come build the kingdom in the midst of it. You have gifts, strengths, lessons that you've learned through going through hard times that you now bring as wisdom. In church, we get to give that to people. We get to serve them. We not only get to manage the chaos of our own lives, but we get to help go tend the chaos of our neighbors. We get to walk with them in hard times. We get to drop some wisdom on them. We get to pray for them. We get to encourage them. We get to laugh at the ridiculousness of the chaos that showed up today. Because sometimes it's so ridiculous that you just have to shake your head and laugh. And then you look God square in the eye and go, let's go, let's do it. Let's go do it. We're going to build the kingdom in Tompkins County. We're going to build the kingdom in our own homes. We need to have the mindset that we've been called to work. We've been called to build a kingdom. We've been called to bring order to chaos. The world will give us chaos on its own. Sometimes that chaos comes in the form of a small child that comes into your house. Absolute barbarians, small children. Absolute barbarians. Nothing civilized about them. But if you'll tend that chaos, and you'll cultivate that field, you'll build the kingdom in that child. Some of you came into your workplaces and you discovered that it wasn't well run before you got there. But if you'll tend that chaos and you'll cultivate that field, you will bear fruit for the kingdom in your workplace. Some of you, your marriages are in a bit of chaos right now. They're not nearly as healthy as you'd like them to be. But if you'll tend that chaos and you'll cultivate that field, you'll bear fruit. In the weeks to come, we're going to look at some of the types of chaos that the Lord allows us to tend. We're going to look at some of the attacks of the enemy that stir the chaos. And we're going to look at the kingdom strengths that are needed to overcome. Because we have work to do, kings and queens, princes and princesses of the King. We've been called to subdue the earth. We've been called to advance the kingdom. So put on your work gloves, pull up your britches, and let's go do it. Let's settle now that we are going to give our lives to work for the kingdom, to bring peace to the chaos of our neighbors, to bring order to the chaos of our world, to bring a kingdom where there was only confusion. Jesus, you've called us to speak good news to the poor, sight to the blind, freedom to the captives. Lord, you've called us to be agents of peace in a world filled with chaos. Lord, would you give us the courage to say yes to this call and to stand and fight the good fight, to bring truth and light and peace and stability to people getting rocked by the storms of life. Lord, would you give us the courage to put our hand to this plow and to till the earth and to fill it with your glory and subdue the chaos and bear fruit for your kingdom. Lord, would you give us the courage to follow our King in establishing a kingdom. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.